The door swung open before she could reach it, and Gwen Harper froze mid-step, coffee sloshing against the lid of her travel mug, because in 28 years nobody had ever held a door for her. The man holding it was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, with hair so pale it looked silver under the fluorescent lights of the legal aid office building. His skin had that same bloodless quality, paper white and smooth as marble. And when he smiled at her confusion, his eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement or might have been hunger. "After you," he said, and his voice carried an accent she couldn't quite place, old world and careful. Gwen blinked. She was holding 3 case files, a laptop bag, and the coffee, her sensible flats already developing a hole in the left sole, and she probably looked exactly like what she was. Someone who worked the intake desk at community legal services by day, answered phones for a crisis hotline 3 evenings a week, and picked up weekend shifts at a 24-hour diner when the utilities needed paying. "Thanks," she managed, slipping past him into the building. The lobby smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. He followed her inside, letting the door close with a soft click. "Forgive me, but you seem surprised." "Nobody holds doors anymore." She shifted the files under her arm, trying to look professional despite everything. "Nobody really holds them for me anyway. I'm usually the one doing the holding." Something changed in his expression then, a sharpening of interest that made her pulse kick up despite herself. "Is that so?" "Yeah, well," she shrugged, already moving toward the elevator. "Thanks again." "My pleasure." He stayed in the lobby as the elevator doors closed, but not before she caught him watching her with an intensity that felt deliberate, studied, like he was memorizing her face. Gwen told herself to forget about it. She had 43 active cases, a landlord tribunal hearing in 2 hours, and a stack of eviction notices on her desk that kept growing no matter how many she filed responses for. A beautiful stranger holding a door didn't mean anything in the grand scheme of how broken the system was. The elevator creaked upward, and she used the reflection in the metal doors to check that her dark hair was still somewhat presentable, that the exhaustion didn't show too badly on her face. She'd worn her good blazer today, the navy one without any stains, because she needed to look competent when she stood in front of the tribunal and argued that her clients deserved to keep their homes. The hearing went exactly as badly as she'd expected. The opposing counsel was from Carrick and Vale, a white shoe firm that specialized in corporate property law, and he had a whole team behind him, assistants and paralegals and bankers' boxes full of documentation. Gwen had her laptop and a folder of tenant statements and the knowledge that she was fighting a shell company called Obsidian Holdings that had been systematically buying up rent-controlled buildings in her neighborhood and finding creative ways to empty them out. "Your Honor, my clients have lived in these apartments for over a decade," she said, standing at the respondent's table in the airless hearing room. "Obsidian Holdings purchased the building 6 months ago and immediately began imposing illegal fees, shutting off utilities for repairs that never happen, and filing frivolous eviction notices. This is constructive eviction, plain and simple." The lawyer from Carrick and Vale didn't even bother standing. "The owner has every right to bring their properties up to code. If the tenants find temporary inconveniences unacceptable, they're welcome to break their leases and relocate." Gwen's jaw tightened. "Temporary inconveniences like no heat in February? The repairs were completed within the statutory time frame. After my clients filed complaints with the city, and now Obsidian is trying to evict them for being 1 day late on rent during the same month their heat was shut off." She turned back to the adjudicator, a tired-looking woman with reading glasses on a chain. "This is retaliation, Your Honor." The adjudicator made a note, her expression giving nothing away. "I'll issue a decision within 30 days. Next case." Gwen gathered her things and walked out into the hallway, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash. 30 days meant 30 more days of uncertainty for her clients, 30 more days of Obsidian finding new ways to make their lives miserable. The courthouse lobby was crowded with lawyers and clerks and people clutching papers they didn't understand, and she was halfway to the exit when someone fell into step beside her. "That was impressive," the pale-haired man from the morning said, "though I suspect you're used to fighting uphill battles." She stopped walking. "Are you following me?" "Only coincidentally. I had business in the building." He tilted his head, studying her. "You're very dedicated to your clients." "It's my job." She shifted her laptop bag. And who are you exactly? Henrik Bathory. He offered his hand, and when she shook it, his skin was cool and dry. I'm in property acquisition, among other things. Of course he was. Gwen pulled her hand back. Then you're part of the problem. Am I? He looked genuinely curious rather than offended. And what problem would that be? Companies like Obsidian buying up affordable housing and squeezing people out so they can flip buildings for profit. People who've lived in this neighborhood their entire lives, who can't afford to go anywhere else. The words came out harder than she'd meant them to, sharpened by the hearing and the exhaustion. But I'm sure you know all about that. I know, Henrik said slowly, that the city is changing, and not always for the better. I also know that you've been working on the Obsidian cases for months now. That stopped her cold. How do you know that? I pay attention to things that matter. He smiled, and there was something ancient in it, something that made her think of churches and crypts and old bloodlines. And you matter, Gwen Harper. She should have been unnerved that he knew her name. Instead, she felt the strange flip of her stomach that came with being seen, actually noticed by someone who looked at her like she was worth the effort. I should go. I have a shift at the crisis line in an hour. Let me walk you out at least. He moved ahead of her before she could answer and pushed open the heavy courthouse door, holding it as she passed through into the gray autumn afternoon. There, that's two. Two what? Doors. His smile widened. I intend to open every one from now on. That's ridiculous, Gwen said, but she felt herself smiling, despite everything, despite the hearing and the exhaustion, and the fact that this man was probably exactly the kind of wealthy property speculator she spent her days fighting. You don't even know me. Then let me remedy that. Dinner? I have the crisis line. Tomorrow night? The diner. Then I'll come to the diner. He said it like it was already decided, inevitable. What time? She should have said no. She had 43 cases and 3 jobs and no time for whatever this was. But Henrik was watching her with those 2 bright eyes, and he'd held 2 doors, and something about the careful way he spoke made her think he actually meant what he said. My shift starts at 6, but you really don't have to. 6 o'clock, he said. I'll be there. He was there at 6, and at 6 the following Friday, and the Friday after that. He came to the diner in his expensive suits and ordered black coffee he never drank and sat at the counter, making quiet conversation whenever Gwen had a moment between taking orders and running plates. He asked about her cases, listened when she talked about the tribunal system and housing law and the way people fell through every crack the system offered, and he never once suggested that she was wasting her time. On the 4th Friday, he brought flowers. On the 5th, he walked her home after her shift, through the neighborhood she was fighting to save, past buildings with Obsidian holding signs in the windows and boarded up storefronts that used to be local businesses. He held every door they passed, apartment lobbies and corner stores and the entrance to her building, and he didn't comment on the broken elevator or the graffiti in the stairwell. This is me, Gwen said when they reached her floor, the 3rd-story walk-up that cost too much even though the heat was unreliable and her neighbor played music until 2 in the morning. Thank you for walking me. Henrik looked at the apartment door like he was memorizing it. It's late. You should rest. I have case files to review. Gwen. He said her name carefully, like it meant something. When do you rest? When people stop getting evicted. She tried to make it sound light, but the truth of it sat heavy between them. I'm fine, really. This is just how it is. It shouldn't be. He stepped closer, and she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the only thing about him that suggested age, even though something in his bearing made her think he was far older than he looked. You carry too much alone. I'm not alone. I have my clients, my co-workers, none of whom hold your doors. His hand came up to brush her cheek, cool fingers against warm skin. None of whom make sure you get home safely or bring you flowers or notice that you drink your coffee black with 2 sugars at 3 in the morning when the crisis calls run long. Gwen's breath caught. You've been paying attention. I told you. You matter. He leaned in, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he kissed her softly, briefly, a promise more than a claim. Good night, Gwen Harper. She watched him walk back down the stairs, his footsteps silent on the worn carpet, and realized she was in serious trouble. The tribunal issued its decision on a Tuesday. Mixed ruling, case remanded for further evidence. Gwen filed 3 more responses to frivolous eviction notices, attended 2 emergency removal hearings, and spent 6 hours on the phone with the city's housing enforcement office trying to get them to actually inspect an Obsidian building where the elevator had been broken for 4 months. Henrik showed up at the legal aid office that Thursday with lunch, real food from a place with cloth napkins, and she ate it at her desk while he sat in the client chair and read through her case files with the careful attention of someone who actually understood property law. "Obsidian is clever," he said, setting down a file. "They're staying just inside the letter of the law while violating its spirit. That's exactly what they're doing, and I can't prove it well enough to convince a tribunal that what they're doing is illegal eviction rather than legitimate property management." She stabbed at her salad, frustrated. The shell company structure makes it impossible to find out who actually owns the buildings or what their larger strategy is. Every document goes through Carrick and Vale, and they've got enough lawyers to bury me in paperwork until my clients give up. Henrik was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. "What if you could prove the ownership structure?" "I'd need financial records, board minutes, something that shows intent, but shell companies exist specifically to hide that information." She looked up at him. "Why? Do you know something about Obsidian?" "I know many things about many companies." He said it lightly, but there was an edge underneath. "Property acquisition is a small world, especially at the higher levels." "The higher levels meaning what exactly? What do you do, Henrik?" She'd been avoiding asking directly, not wanting to shatter whatever this was between them, but the question hung there now. "You never talk about your work. You're always available no matter when I call, and you clearly know things about real estate law that most people don't." He set down the file and looked at her directly. "I sit on a council that oversees certain property interests in the city, investments held by very old families with very old money." "Families like yours?" "Yes." Gwen's stomach dropped. "Please tell me you're not involved with Obsidian Holdings?" "Not directly. But the council..." He paused, choosing words carefully. "The council has interests that sometimes align with companies like Obsidian. It's complicated." "It's really not." She pushed back from her desk, anger rising hot and sudden. "Either you're part of the system that's destroying people's homes, or you're not. There's no complicated middle ground when families are sleeping in their cars." "Gwen, I told you what I do, I told you why it matters, and you've been sitting here listening and bringing me lunch and holding my doors while sitting on some council that enables exactly the kind of predatory behavior I'm fighting." She felt something crack in her chest, disappointment sharp enough to hurt. Was any of this real? Or were you just keeping tabs on someone who might become a problem? Henrik stood, and there was something in his expression she'd never seen before, old and tired and infinitely sad. "Everything between us has been real, everything. But you're right that I should have told you sooner. You should have told me immediately, on day 1. She crossed her arms, kneading the barrier. "I need you to leave." He moved toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the handle. "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I'm not your enemy, Gwen. And the council isn't what you think it is." "Then what is it?" "Something older than property law, older than this city, and I've been working for a very long time to change it from within." He opened the door himself, stepping through without the usual flourish. "When you're ready to hear the whole truth, I'll tell you everything." Gwen didn't call him. She threw herself into her cases instead, working 16-hour days and picking up extra diner shifts to fill the hours she'd been spending with Henrik. She filed motions, conducted tenant interviews, and tried very hard not to think about cool hands and careful kisses and the way he'd looked at her like she was someone worth holding doors for. 3 weeks after their fight, a package arrived at the legal aid office addressed to her. Inside was a thick folder of documents, financial records, board minutes, and a corporate structure chart that laid out exactly how Obsidian Holdings connected to a web of shell companies, all of them ultimately controlled by something called the Covenant Council. There was a note in precise handwriting. "These are copies. The originals are held in a private archive that cannot be accessed through legal channels. Use them carefully." Gwen spread the documents across her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she read. The Covenant Council wasn't just a real estate investment group. It was an organization that had existed for centuries, managing properties and assets across the city, and its members had names she recognized from historical buildings and old street signs, the kind of names that showed up in museum dedications and genealogical records going back to the colonial era, the kind of names that shouldn't still be alive. She sat back in her chair, pieces clicking together in a pattern she didn't want to see. Henrik's pale skin, his careful avoidance of daylight, the way he moved too quietly and spoke with an accent that belonged to a different century. The old world manners and the way he'd kissed her like he had all the time in the world, because he probably did. Vampire. He was a vampire, and she'd been dating him for 2 months without realizing it, and he sat on a council of immortals who treated human tenants as disposable assets in a portfolio spanning centuries. Gwen picked up her phone and called the number he'd given her on the first day. He answered on the second ring. "We need to talk," she said, "and you're going to tell me everything." They met in a park after dark, because of course they did. Henrik was waiting on a bench near the fountain, wearing a long coat against the autumn chill he probably didn't feel, and when Gwen sat down, he didn't reach for her. "You're a vampire," she said without preamble. "The Covenant Council is made up of vampires, and you've all been treating this city like your personal territory for how long, exactly? 347 years, give or take." He looked at her steadily. "Since the city was barely more than a colonial trading post? And the people living here were just cattle to you?" "No." The word came out sharp. "You've never been that. Not to me and not to many of us, though I won't pretend the council is without members who see humans as beneath them." He turned on the bench to face her fully. The Covenant was established to maintain order, to prevent the kind of exploitation that happens when immortals accumulate too much power unchecked. But over time, it's become exactly what it was meant to prevent. A small group of old families controlling resources, property, livelihoods, using shell companies and legal structures to hide what we are while benefiting from the fact that we don't age, don't die, can wait out any human opposition. Obsidian Holdings is run by 3 council members who see humans as temporary inconveniences. They buy buildings in neighborhoods they consider desirable, make life intolerable for existing tenants, then redevelop for the luxury market. It's happened a dozen times in the last 50 years. His hands clenched on his knees. And the rest of the council allows it because we're bound by old laws that prioritize vampire interests above human welfare. Gwen felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "How long have you known?" "That obsidian was targeting your neighborhood since before I met you. I've been documenting their activities for the past 5 years, building a case within the council to shut them down." He met her eyes. "I didn't hold that door by accident, Gwen. I'd been watching you work, reading your filings, and I wanted to meet the person who fought that hard for people she didn't have to care about." "So you did lie to me. This whole time. I kept things from you. But everything I felt, everything between us was real." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back, and when she didn't, he took her hand. His skin was cool, but not cold, and his grip was gentle. "I've lived a long time, and I've never met anyone like you. Someone who sees the world as it should be and fights to make it that way, who holds doors for other people even when nobody holds them for you. You make me want to be better than I've been, to actually finish what I started instead of just documenting injustice and calling it progress." "What did you start?" She didn't pull her hand away. "Trying to change the council from within, proving that the old ways don't work anymore, that we can't keep treating humans as lesser and expect to remain hidden in a world with cameras and databases and activists like you who won't let things stay buried." He squeezed her fingers. "But it's slow work, and the council is old, and most of them would rather wait you out than change. They're used to thinking in centuries." "I don't have centuries. My clients don't have centuries. They have 30 days before the tribunal makes a final decision. And then what? Another building full of families gets cleared out and Obsidian moves on to the next neighborhood?" She pulled the folder from her bag and set it between them. "You gave me ammunition, so tell me how to use it. That's Vampire Council documentation. If you expose it, you expose us." Good. Maybe you should be exposed. Maybe people deserve to know that they're fighting immortals with infinite resources and infinite patience. Gwen. He said it gently. If you expose the council, you become a threat. There are members who would eliminate threats permanently rather than risk discovery. She felt the weight of that settle over her, the reality of what she'd stumbled into. Are you threatening me? I'm protecting you. There's a difference. He stood, pulling her up with him. Let me show you something. He led her through the park to a street she knew, one she walked every day going to and from the legal aid office. But Henrik guided her past the familiar facades to a narrow alley, and at the end of that alley was a door she'd never noticed, iron-bound and ancient-looking despite the modern buildings around it. This is one of the old entrances, he said, producing a key that looked like it belonged in a museum. The council meets beneath the city, in chambers that were built before the first grid was laid. Most council members never come above ground during the day, never see the people whose lives they're affecting. They make policy in the dark and let their lawyers implement it. The door opened onto stairs leading down, lit by fixtures that might have been electric or might have been something older. Gwen followed Henrik into a passage that smelled of stone and earth and time, her heart hammering, and tried to remember that she'd faced down landlords and corporate lawyers and bureaucrats who cared more about procedures than people. A vampire council couldn't be that much worse. The chamber at the bottom of the stairs proved her wrong. It was vast, cathedral-ceilinged and columned, carved from bedrock and decorated with centuries of accumulated wealth. Tapestries older than the country hung on the walls, and the long table in the center was surrounded by high-backed chairs, most of them empty at this hour. 3 figures stood near the far end, and all of them turned when Henrik and Gwen entered. They were pale and beautiful and utterly inhuman in their stillness, dressed in clothes that spanned eras, and the one in the center smiled with too many teeth. "Henrik, you've brought a guest." The voice was smooth, ageless. "How unexpected." "Lord Severin, Lady Isolde, Councillor Thorne." Henrik moved forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Gwen. "I'm invoking challenge protocol." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The woman, Isolde, tilted her head. "On what grounds?" "Obsidian Holdings is in violation of the Covenant's founding principle, that our existence remains hidden and that we maintain balance with human society. The systematic displacement of human residents draws attention, generates documentation, and risks exposure." He pulled out a file identical to the one he'd given Gwen. "I have evidence of 15 violations of the exposure protocols and 12 breaches of the minimal harm doctrine." "The minimal harm doctrine has always been loosely interpreted," Severin said, "and Obsidian's activities are well within established precedent." "Then the precedent is wrong," Henrik's voice hardened, "and I'm challenging it. The old laws say a council member can demand review of any policy that threatens the Covenant's secrecy. I'm demanding that review now." Thorne, who'd been silent until now, laughed. "You're challenging 3 centuries of property practice because you've taken up with a human activist? How romantic. And how foolish. I'm challenging it because it's unsustainable. Gwen's cases have already generated press coverage. Her tribunal filings are public record, and she's not the only one paying attention anymore. There are journalists, housing advocates, politicians starting to ask questions about Obsidian's ownership structure." He set the file on the table. "We can change now, voluntarily, or we can wait until we're exposed and destroyed. Those are the only options." Isolde glided closer, her eyes fixed on Gwen. "And what does the human think? Does she understand what she's stumbled into? That there are consequences for knowing too much?" Gwen found her voice, pushing down the fear. "I think you've been exploiting people because you can, because you're old and powerful and you've never had to face real accountability. But times change. Legal systems change. Information spreads faster now than it did 300 years ago, and eventually someone's going to connect the dots." She straightened her shoulders. "So you can either shut down Obsidian and stop displacing people, or I'll make sure those dots get connected very publicly." "Is that a threat?" Severin's smile widened. "It's a promise. I have documentation showing Obsidian's corporate structure. I have tenant testimony, and I have Henrik's files showing the council's involvement. If my clients lose their homes, I'll take everything I know to the press, to housing advocates, to anyone who'll listen." Her voice didn't shake. "Maybe nobody will believe me about vampires, but they'll believe the paper trail, and that'll be enough to cause you problems." Silence stretched through the chamber. Then Thorne laughed again, sharp and humorless. "She has teeth. I like her." "But she's still human," Isolde said, "and humans die so easily." Henrik moved then, faster than Gwen could track, positioning himself fully between her and the other council members. "If you touch her, you break the covenant yourselves. We don't kill to silence anymore. That was outlawed in 1843 after the Inquisition scares." "Accidents happen," Severin said mildly, "not to people under my protection." Henrik's voice carried weight Gwen had never heard before, something ancient and absolute. "I'm invoking blood right. She's mine to shield, and anyone who harms her answers to me directly." The air in the chamber grew thick with tension. Gwen didn't fully understand what had just happened, but she understood enough. Henrik had just claimed her in front of his people, painted a target on himself to keep her safe. Isolde's expression shifted, something like respect flickering across her face. "You'd go to blood feud over a human?" "Yes." "Then you're a fool," Thorne said, "but a fool invoking ancient law." "Very well, your challenge is noted. The council will convene for formal review in 3 days. He waved a dismissive hand. "Take your human and go. We'll summon you when we've decided whether your concerns have merit." Henrik didn't wait for further permission. He took Gwen's hand and led her back through the passages, up the stairs, out into the autumn night that felt warm compared to the chamber below. She was shaking by the time they reached street level, adrenaline and fear catching up with her all at once. "What did you just do?" she asked. "She protected you. The blood right is old law, older than the council itself. It means you're under my personal protection, and anyone who harms you will have to face me in formal combat." He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "They won't risk it. I'm old enough and strong enough that a challenge would be genuinely dangerous for them." "And what does it mean for me? That I'm yours? That you're protected? Nothing more than you consent to." His hands settled on her shoulders, warm through the coat. "I should have told you everything from the beginning. About what I am, about the council, about why I really approached you. But I was a coward. And I wanted just a little time where you looked at me like I was someone worth knowing instead of a monster." "You're not a monster." The words came out automatically, and then she realized she meant them. "You could have stayed silent, let the council keep exploiting people and hidden behind the fact that no one would believe the truth, but you didn't. You've been fighting them, and now you're risking yourself to protect me. Because you're worth it. Because what you do matters." He touched her face, careful and reverent, "because somewhere between the first door and the 50th, I fell in love with you, Gwen Harper. And I don't care if it's foolish or dangerous or completely impossible. You make me want to be the man you thought I was when you smiled at me in that diner." She kissed him then, standing on a street corner in the neighborhood she was fighting for, and it felt like falling and flying at once. He kissed back carefully, like she was precious, and when they broke apart, she was crying without quite knowing when she'd started. "I love you too," she said. "Even though you're a vampire and you should have told me, and this is completely insane." "Completely insane," he agreed, and smiled like she'd given him something he'd been searching centuries to find. The council convened 3 days later. Henrik brought Gwen despite protests from the other members, invoking the blood right again to insist she had standing as the human most directly affected by Obsidian's actions. The full council turned out for the review. 11 vampires of varying ages and temperaments, some who looked at Gwen with curiosity, others with contempt, and a few with what might have been sympathy. Henrik presented his case methodically, laying out evidence of exposure risks and documentation trails, of media attention and legal scrutiny. He called on the Covenant's own founding laws, written when secrecy meant survival, and argued that Obsidian's actions threatened to undo centuries of careful anonymity. "We can't afford to treat humans as disposable anymore," he said, standing at the head of the table while the council listened. "The world has changed. Information spreads instantly. Legal systems are interconnected, And people like Gwen don't give up just because we've been here longer. They fight, and they document, and eventually, they win. He turned to face Severin directly. Obsidian is a liability. Shut it down, return the properties to the displaced tenants, and establish new protocols that prioritize minimal harm and genuine secrecy. And if we refuse, Severin asked, then I'll resign from the council and take my case public. I'll help Gwen expose every shell company, every holding, every connection between the Covenant and the city's property structure. We'll burn together if we have to, but at least I'll go down fighting for something that matters. Silence. Then a voice from the far end of the table, an ancient vampire with silver hair past her shoulders. I vote for review and reform. Henrik is right that times have changed. We've grown careless. Another voice, seconded. The exposure risk is real. The votes came slowly, reluctantly, but they came. When the count was finished, 7 of the 11 had voted to shut down Obsidian Holdings and establish new protocols for property management. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Severin stood stiffly. The council has spoken. Obsidian will be dissolved, its assets returned or sold to legitimate buyers, and the displaced tenants will be offered compensation and right of return. He looked at Henrik with something that might have been grudging respect. You've won your challenge. I hope it's worth what it's cost you. It is, Henrik said, and he reached for Gwen's hand. The tribunal case wrapped up quickly after that. With Obsidian suddenly willing to settle, Gwen's clients got agreements in writing, rent stabilization, repairs completed, no retaliation. The company itself filed for dissolution 2 weeks later, its properties transferred to a non-profit housing trust that Henrik helped establish and fund. Carrick and Vale withdrew from all related cases, and the eviction notices stopped coming. It took 4 months to get everyone back into the building to complete the repairs that Obsidian had been using as excuse for displacement to process the paperwork and signatures and inspections. Gwen worked with her clients through all of it, helping them navigate the system, and Henrik showed up at every hearing, every walkthrough, every tedious bureaucratic appointment. He sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs in city offices and held doors for elderly tenants, and once spent 6 hours helping someone fill out repair request forms. You don't have to do this, Gwen told him after a particularly long day at the housing authority. You've already done enough. I made a promise, Henrik said, every door from now on. That includes metaphorical ones. The building reopening was scheduled for a Saturday in early spring. Someone had organized a block party, tables set up in the street and music playing from somebody's speaker, and Gwen stood on the sidewalk watching her clients celebrate with a feeling like relief so profound it ached. These were people she'd fought for, families who'd trusted her when the system failed them, and they were home because she hadn't given up. Because Henrik hadn't given up either. You did this, he said, appearing at her elbow with 2 cups of coffee from the corner bodega. All of this. We did this. She took the coffee, black with 2 sugars, because he always remembered. You're the one who challenged the council. You're the one who risked everything. Only after you showed me it was worth risking. He nodded toward the building, where the first families were starting to arrive with boxes and suitcases and houseplants. Shall we? They walked together to the front entrance, where someone had tied balloons to the railing and a small crowd was gathering. The building manager was there with keys and welcome packets, and as each tenant arrived, Henrik stepped forward and held the door open, greeting them by name, welcoming them home. He held the door for Mrs. Chen, who'd lived in apartment 3B for 20 years, and cried when she saw her unit freshly painted. For the Martinez family with 3 kids under 5 and another on the way. For old Mr. Washington, who walked with a cane and told Henrik he was a good man for a landlord, which made Gwen laugh, because if only he knew. Henrik held the door for all of them, every single person, and when the last tenant had gone inside, he turned to Gwen with a question in his eyes. Your turn, he said. I don't live here. You could. He said it softly, seriously. Not in this building, obviously, but there are other properties. Better ones. I own 6 buildings in the area that could use someone who actually cares about tenants to help manage them, someone who knows housing law and tenant rights and how to fight for people who need fighting for. Henrik? She set down her coffee. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, Help me run the trust, make sure the other council members follow the new protocols, turn the covenant's property holdings into something that actually serves the community instead of exploiting it. He took her hands. You could quit the other jobs, focus on this full time, and I know you won't let me simply support you, so this is me finding a way to pay you fairly for work that matters. That's a very practical proposal, Gwen said, smiling. I'm nothing if not practical. He smiled back. But there's another proposal, if you're interested. One that's less professional and more personal. I'm listening. Live with me. Not because I'm keeping you or taking care of you, but because I love you and I want to wake up to you every morning, assuming you can tolerate waking up to someone who doesn't technically sleep and occasionally has to attend midnight council meetings. I want to hold your doors and bring you coffee and listen to you explain property law until I understand all of it as well as you do. He pulled her closer. I want to spend whatever time we have making the city better, fighting for people together, and being the kind of immortal who deserves someone like you choosing to stay with him. Gwen's throat went tight. Whatever time we have, you mean until I die and you keep going? I mean whatever we decide together. There are options if you wanted them eventually, ways for humans to become like us, though it's not easy and not without cost. He touched her face. But that's a conversation for later, if you want it. Right now, I'm just asking you to be with me, to let me love you the way you deserve, with doors and coffee and showing up unglamorously to every hearing for the rest of your life. That's a long time to show up to hearings. I've got time. His smile was soft, genuine, and completely human despite everything he was. So what do you say, Gwen Harper? Will you let me keep my promise? She kissed him there in front of the building full of families they'd saved, with music playing and spring sun warm on her shoulders and the knowledge that the fight wasn't over, but it was winnable. Yes, to all of it. The partnership, the apartment, the future we figure out together. She pulled back to look at him properly. I love you, Henrik Bathory, even though you're a dramatic vampire king with a door-opening obsession. Especially because of that, he said. And kissed her again. Behind them, someone whistled. Mrs. Chen was leaning out her third-floor window, grinning. You two are blocking the door. Henrik laughed and pulled Gwen aside, holding the door open with a flourish as another family arrived with boxes. After you, he said to them, then turned back to Gwen. See? Every door. Every door, she agreed, and took his hand. And together they walked into the future they'd fought for, one door, one case, one day at a time.